I'm Charlie Jagno, Clerk of Court of St. Landry Parish. I've been in this job since 1992, and it's been my pleasure to serve the people of St. Landry Parish as their clerk. One of the favorite parts of my job is the archives and the responsibilities and the opportunities that go along with taking care of the archives of such an old parish. We were part of Imperial St. Landry Parish when it was created. And so we have records that go way back to the 1700s. Matter of fact, this courthouse was completed in 1941, but the first courthouse was built here in about 1920, and I'm sorry, 1837. There was also a structure here in 1806. 1820, it burned down, and it burned down again in 1939. That's when the present courthouse was built. Fortunately, the records were kept in an outbuilding and they weren't lost. So we have records all the way back to the colonial period. The first clerk here was Judge Lee, and he served as a clerk from 1805 to 1807. He became the parish probate judge from 1807 and he served until 1842. Our colonial records cover a period of 1764 to 1803. They're on microfilm here and available on microfilm, and they're also at the state archives. The notarial records span the time period of 1820 to 1850, and the first parish recorder was here in 1845. We have records that are imaged and indexed in various periods from the 1800s to present, and in mid 2015 we should have a constant record that's imaged and indexed and available online from 1800 to the present day. We're pretty proud of that, and that should be completed early next year. I'd like to introduce our archivist, a former archivist who's retired now, Mr. Keith Fontenot, and he can expand on what I've told you about our records here in St. Landry Parish. Thank you.
I am Keith Fontenot, the former archivist for the St. Landry Parish Clerk of Court's office. I have had a unique experience as an historian to be able to work on a daily basis with primary historical documents. Basically trying to re-index the earlier records of the St. Landry Parish Clerk of Court's office. Again, this collection reflects the frontier of the old Spanish Caribbean borderlands. Historically, you have a mix of Anglo, Creole, Native American, African American, Spaniards, and you also have these Melungeons that have come in, which is a triracial mixture after 1803, that were basically living in the what is now Allen and Beauregard parishes. The records here go back to 1764 with the establishment of the posts by the Spanish colonial government. Basically, this was a buffer zone to protect the riches of Mexico. Louisiana, again, goes back to Robert Cavalier de La Salle, who in 1688 claims the Mississippi River and all its tributaries for France. Names it after Louis XIV, the Sun King, and his wife Anna. LaSalle did not have any idea what he was claiming. In essence, the Louisiana, or French Louisiana, prior to 1763 goes from the Appalachian Mountains all the way to the Rockies, basically the center of the present United States. And from a historical viewpoint, New Orleans was extremely important. It was the second city founded in the present-day state of Louisiana in 1718. Natchitoches goes back a little earlier to 1713. The records in this office reflect the daily lives and problems and conflicts that these individuals had going back to 1764. So we have to manage records from the 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. And these records do rival New Orleans and Mobile in the development of the Gulf Coast. Louisiana was originally founded as a buffer zone. The Opelousas Post comes into existence in 1764 with Louis Pellerin, the first commandant. He establishes his residency somewhere north of Lafayette along the watershed. There's a watershed there that all the bayous will either go east or they will go towards the west. And again, from a topographical viewpoint, this is important because the Spaniards, especially Casa de Calvo, considered the Louisiana Purchase to be the lands drained by the Mississippi. Opelousas is drained either by the Teche or the Catawba, Viva the distributor of the Atchafalaya, and they considered Opelousas and points west not to be part of the Louisiana Purchase. So basically, you have to broaden your horizons and also understand the political and military problems and feuds and wars that were going on with the European powers, especially Great Britain, France, Spain, and then later the young American Republic. The American founding fathers had the concept of manifest destiny. They believed that the United States should stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And Thomas Jefferson should also be considered the father of the American West. He does purchase Louisiana in 1802, but he also sends the Corps of Discovery under Lewis and Clark to the headwaters of the Missouri and ultimately to the Pacific, which gives the United States claims to the Oregon and Washington Territory. Jefferson knew what was in Louisiana. He wanted it. So he sends James Monroe and Edward Livingston to talk to Talleyrand, the French foreign minister, in 1803. with the express intent to purchase the Isle of Orleans. Well, Talleyrand said he would consult with Napoleon. Now this is interesting how the unforeseen consequences of yellow fever come into play. Napoleon had had a grand design on North America. However, his army in Santo Domingue, or Haiti, was ravaged by yellow fever. It's a point where nature comes in on the historical process and changes the outcome of certain events. So Napoleon decides to sell the whole of Louisiana to the United States. Really, Jefferson didn't know what he was buying, but he says, I will find the money and we will purchase this. What is the significance is you have these 13 states that are cut out of the purchase, and it is really the underpinning that will ultimately lead to the rise of the United States as a superpower. So you have vast resources, population, rich, fertile soil. But getting back to 1804, the Louisiana Purchase was divided between the territory of Orleans and the Louisiana territory. The territory of Orleans would in essence be what is now the state of Louisiana. In 1810, West Florida, Spanish West Florida went as far west as Baton Rouge. There was a revolt, and that part of West Florida is eventually incorporated into the territory of Orleans. Jefferson looks at Louisiana, and he knows this is the first time that they are taking in people with a different culture, a different language, and he basically decides to let Spanish and French colonial civil law to be continued in Louisiana. This is especially expressed in women's property rights, where the wife had a tacit mortgage on her husband's property. This was for the purpose that if he squandered her separate property, she could haul him into court and institute a para-fraternal suit, which he in turn had to make a dachshund en paiement to give restitution for property that he had alienated without her consent. So historically, women's property rights were better protected in Louisiana than in the other English common law states. And again, this is due to Spanish colonial law. If you read the territorial papers and the correspondence between Governor Claiborne and Jefferson, you will see that they are interested in keeping a lot of the colonial institutions intact. The Opelousas Post, again, is a frontier district. It's well kept, up to today, has always been derived from the land. In the earlier days, it was agriculture, cotton. It was one of the largest producers of beef in the United States prior to 1845, and it provided sugar, hides, and other staples and necessities to New Orleans. New Orleans has been studied extensively, but this is an urban area, while Opelousas, St. Landry Parish, is a rural agricultural region. And again, people should realize that our ancestors of 200 years ago had a different mindset than we have today. Life was tough, it was hard, and short. Yellow fever epidemics decimated the area, along with typhoid and other microorganisms. If we go back to 1804, the territory of the territory of Orleans is originally divided into 12 counties, and Opelousas became the county of Opelousas 2 years later with the bicameral territorial legislature. The territory was subdivided into 19 parishes, again going back to the Spanish configuration of the area. The county of Opelousas is renamed St. Landry Parish after the ecclesiastical parish that was established in the village of Opelousas in 1798 by a donation from Michel Prudhomme. So Opelousas becomes a focal point. It's, again, it's high ground. It will be designated as one of the 2 federal land offices in the Orleans territory. The Opelousas Land Office took care of land claims from the Atchafalaya to the Sabine to the Gulf north to Arkansas. The United States government would raise revenue by selling off land for $1.25 an acre, or it would give patents to individuals for military service, and you had to go to the federal land office and perfect your title if you were a colonial property owner. Uncle Sam wanted to know what was yours and what was his, so he could sell off the public domain. And it's also interesting to note that you did have some individuals who were squatting on the public domain, and you have sales of improvements whereby they could sell the house, the barn, the outbuildings, but they could not sell the land, since it was not segregated from the U.S. government. You know, to continue, lower Louisiana, the Mississippi River, was essential to several nations: Spain, the United States, France. If you controlled the Isle of Orleans, you basically controlled the American heartland. And the American government would have probably gone to war in order to obtain the Isle of Orleans. It's just lucky that Napoleon was strapped for cash, and he needed some pocket money, so he decides to get rid of something which In his mind, well, look, it just won't work, you know. So we come to the Northern Caribbean borderlands, the South of the South. The records in the Opelousas courthouse reflect the history, the culture, and the people who made this part of the country what it is today. Our ancestors came in, braved the elements, purchased land or were given land grants, and they produced agricultural crops. You know, cattle was very important. And as one enters the clerk of court's office, especially the archives, you will find that the typewriter and computer is basically of no assistance. You enter a total different world where you have to deal with bad handwriting, French documents, Spanish documents, phonetic spellings of names, poor property descriptions, and it could be a very interesting educational process. The colonial records, which originally were in Baton Rouge, reflect the colonial era. You did have a commandant who was also an ex officio notary. He would conduct business transactions, land sales, slave sales. He also would petition the Governor General for a land patent from the Spanish colonial governor. And he also held court for minor crimes. He was also assisted by syndics, or the captains, the quartiers as they were called, who would basically, in some ways, perform the same duties as the justices of the peace. So you did have due process of law. You did have, you know, problems, people that didn't have enough cash, they went bankrupt, or some people could have engaged in unlawful activities. It was up to the commandant to enforce the laws of the Spanish colonial government. In 1804, the Opelousas Post turns over its records to the U.S. Army at the Michel Prudhomme home. Honoré de la Chaise is the last colonial commandant. He is ultimately replaced by Theophilus Collins, the county judge, and later in 1807 by George King, who was the clerk of court, and he will be the parish judge till 1842.